When's the last time that you told God, not my will, but your will be done? We all have so many plans that we have created for our lives. And I can be honest and say, have I always consulted God about my plans? Or do I tell God my plans and just determine that this is what's best for me? Well, today I want to talk to us about surrendering our plans to God and why it's so important. Well, it's important because we can get frustrated trying to see what we want happen when we want to happen. But when we allow God to determine the plans that he has for our lives, he always he already has a way of seeing it to fruition. He already has a way that it will manifest and that everything will work together for our good. But a lot of times, because we want things when we want it on our timeline, we begin to trust in ourselves and we begin to finagle situations to work out the way we want them to work out. So some of us have had plans to get married by a certain age, have children by a certain age, and when the time begins to come near, we get frustrated. We get angry, we get mad because things aren't happening the way we think they should. But have we considered that that's not God's plan for us? It's the plan that we have for ourselves. And so that's why it's important to, one, first acknowledge God's sovereignty. God is so great. Like his plans are great. He knows exactly what we need, how we need it. And he has already determined how everything is going to work out for our good. So why can't we trust God to do what he said he would do? Why can't we trust God to plan our lives out exactly how they need to look? Because God knows what we need. He knows how it's going to come to pass. He knows everything about us. And he knows why his timing is perfect. See, we don't know his timing, so we begin to rush things when it don't look like it's moving fast enough. But God's timing and our timing are two different timings. What we think is a long time is a blink of an eye for God. So we have to trust that God's plans are greater than our own plans. We have to start recognizing that what we want, God can give us more than what we could ever imagine. So we're going to start by acknowledging God's sovereignty. And then next, we're going to pray for God's will to be done. So we're going to ask God to align our hearts with his will, even if it means letting go of our desires. See, sometimes we get so caught up on wanting things when we want it. But sometimes we need to go to the word, like it says in Luke 22:42. Lord, not my will, but your will be done. This means that regardless of what I see, regardless of what I want, God, I want your will to be done. If it doesn't happen in your timing, it's okay because it is your will and not my will. I trust your will over my own will. We have to put that faith in God. The next we have to do is release control. So, releasing control means saying surrendering to God. Surrender is an act of trust, it's an act of faith. When you surrender, you're saying, God, I don't know what the outcome is. I don't know if I'm going to get what I want or if this is what you desire of me. But when you put your ultimate trust in God, I guarantee you can't go wrong. Like you cannot go wrong at all with trusting God because God knows what's best for you. So let it go. Let the thoughts go, let the frustration go, let the anger go. Just let it all go. Let it go and watch what God does with it. Because when you let it go, you're trusting God. You're putting your faith in God. He is the ultimate father. Like I said, the father knows what's best for us. The father will not forsake us. He will never leave us. He's going to fulfill his promise. So if it's a promise that God has spoken over you, it will come to pass. It'll come to pass. We can see in the Bible that Abraham had to wait his whole life, pretty much, not his whole life, but he had to wait till old age to have his son Isaac. And even when he had him, he had to risk killing his own son because he knew that, if God were calling him to sacrifice his son, then God was going to give him another son in the place of him. But there's going to be moments when we're going to be challenged in the way that we think. We're going to be challenged in our desires. We're going to be challenged with our blessings. And how are we going to react in those moments? Are we going to trust God to do what he said he would do? Are we going to trust God to fulfill his promises? Are we going to trust God to show up in our most important needs and making sure that we have what we need? Or are we going to take things into our own hands and do it for ourselves? So when we put everything in our own hands, when we start trusting in our own self, then we have to suffer the circumstances and the backlash that may come from doing those things outside of God's will. But when we are putting our trust in God, we're staying in His will and we're allowing His will to be done and not our own. The next thing we have to do is take the first step. So that's trusting God's guidance one step at a time. Faith is about obedience and not having the full picture. So when we're stepping out on faith, when God is saying to us, "Hey, I want you to go buy this house," well, stepping out on faith is getting approved for a loan. Now, we don't know where the house is going to sit at. We don't know the address of the house. We don't know the square footage of the house. But if God says, "I want to bless you with the house in this season," the first step may be one, if your credit isn't already ready, you would have to get your credit ready. If you haven't already started saving money to prepare for a down payment, then you got to start saving money. But if you have those things in place, then you can go find a lender and a real estate agent to help you. But you see that there are steps that must be taken in order to get the house. You can't just hear God say you're going to get a house today and then you haven't completed the other steps. See, it's a process to everything that we do in life. Even when it's time to get married or to have children, birth doesn't happen immediately. Birth tends to happen after 9 months. And so we have to prepare our minds, our bodies, our souls, our spiritual beings. We have to prepare them for the opportunities that are to come. And so that means preparing our mind, preparing our bodies, eating healthy, making sure that we're feeding our spiritual mind with reading the Bible and studying God's word. Like there are steps that must be taken in order for you to see God manifest things in your life. And then the last step is resting in God's timing. Be still and know that I'm God. Psalms 46:10. So once you surrender, you let go of the anxiety. You trust God to move in His perfect timing. And you know that when God's timing, with God's timing, it's going to always be perfect. You're going to always be prepared for whatever God has for you because God is not going to put more on you than you can bear. So when people say, "Well, God gave me this house," and that meant God gave them a house that they could afford. God gave them a house that they can upkeep. God gave them a house that fit within the parameters of what they needed when it came to how many bedrooms they needed, how many bathrooms they needed. Like God will never put more on you that you can bear because you don't want to get into a house or you don't want to take on a job that you're not prepared for. So you can get a mortgage on a house, that's simple, but keep continuing to pay the mortgage every month, that's different. That's just like going and buying a car. You can go get the most expensive car on the lot, but then have you counted the cost of having that expensive car? Have you counted the cost of the insurance and how much that's going to cost you? Because that could be just as much as a car note each month. So we have to be prepared in the things that we're asking God for, and we have to make sure that we're trusting God's timing, trusting that God is preparing us during our waiting season for the things that we ask for. You don't just become a wife overnight. No, God prepares you to be a wife before you find your husband or before your husband finds you. It says, "He who findeth a wife." So that means you already have the characteristics of a wife before you become a wife. And I think that's where we don't realize certain things is that God places those characteristics in us before He allows us to experience that next season. So if we're looking for a new job and we're expecting to make 6 figures, well then God, He wants to know how we're going to manage those 6 figures. He wants to know what we're going to do with the funds that we have. Where are we going to tithe our money? Are we going to give to the poor? Like what are we doing with the money? So we got to be intentional about how we're showing up and trusting God's timing. And then we got to realize that God's plans never fail. So we have to be ready to trust God in all seasons. We have to be able to know that God will never leave us nor forsake us. We have to know that God will fulfill His promises in our lives. And so I want you to comment below that I trust you, Lord. I trust you, Lord. That means we're surrendering everything to Him today by putting that in the chat. I trust you, Lord. Because we want to see God do some great and mighty things in our lives. And in order to see those things, we have to put our trust in God and watch Him do great and mighty things for us.